So in agricultural society, people live in very large extended families, and there isn't much formal education. The people who have knowledge in agricultural society are the landlord, maybe your religious leader, your priest, your imam will tell you life is really difficult, but you know, if you live a good life, you have your reward in the next life. I always think that one's a little bit dodgy. I'd like to have a good life now as well. But it can shape things like marriage. If land is hugely important, and owning land or having access to land is hugely important, marriage becomes a family affair, because marriage is essentially a property contract. So in agricultural societies, it's not a matter of going to a nightclub and meeting someone you fancy and getting married. It's often an issue of families introducing people to other families and putting good matches together, because once they're married, land moves with marriage. So these are the features of an agricultural society. Now today, agricultural society is not the dominant form of which people live on Earth, but an awful lot of people do. You and I don't, but lots of people in China and Africa, and even here in Brazil, still live in agricultural society. You may drive several hours out into the countryside in the US or in Europe, and you will find people who, although we may live in a knowledge economy, they may still be living in an agricultural society. And this is particularly true in China. In China, if you go to Beijing, you'll be in the city and you'll see all the busy office ladies with their Louis Vuitton handbags, and they're all living in the knowledge economy. Their parents are all living in an industrial age, working in factories, but then their grandparents are living in rural China. And all three elements of those societies coexist. Does that make sense? But what China is doing is China is eliminating one. Through its one-child policy, China is roughly 1.2 billion people at the moment. In 20 years, it will be 750 million people. The peasant class have agreed to their annihilation through the one-child policy. Does that make sense? And China then China stops taking little steps to the future, and China takes massive steps to the future. And that's quite an amazing economic, political, and geographical instance to emerge. Now, the thing about agricultural society is so dominant. My last example is this. If you look at the great religious texts in the world, the Bible, the Quran, I'm not hugely familiar with either of them, but they are books that even today influence a lot of people's lives. The one that I know most about is the Bible, and it's full of wine, sheep, harvests. All of the references are agricultural. So this agricultural society, hugely important, still important, but not the dominant form. Now what happens about 1850 is really interesting. In 1850, we get an industrial economy. Now this is very closely related to England. This is the Victorian age in England, and we have a catalyst. And a catalyst is the technological change. Technology in 1850 changes Britain and many other countries from farming societies to industrial societies. Now, the technological changes of the 1850s are things like machinery, the steam engine, these kind of inventions. And it means that society radically changes. People move from the countryside to the city. People who worked on farms move from farms into factories. Society changes, jobs change, but so too does wealth. Does that make sense? If the landlord is important in agricultural age, who is important in an industrial society? Who has the wealth? Sorry, I didn't hear that. The owner of the factory, absolutely. Who said that? Well done, you said the owner of the factory. You're absolutely right. This is what Karl Marx said. All of a sudden, power shifts. Power shifts from the landlord to the owner of the factory. And this is hugely transformational. And it gives rise to one of the most important or significant books that's ever been written by a chap called Karl Marx, called Das Kapital. Capitalism emerges, and at this stage, it's no longer important who owns land, but who owns the factory, who owns the money. And Marx recognizes straight away, although much of his teaching may not hold value anymore, he recognizes straight away that the capitalist system changes power, creates that the workers are all into the factory, and that the capitalist is now powerful. This changes work, it changes power, it changes lives, and new money emerges. So in Britain, The lords and the ladies look down at their nose at these new rich merchants, but they can't ignore the fact that the merchants now become rich. They own the factories, they own the money, because this is what's important in industrial economy. And industrial economy still exists. Lots of people all over the world still work in factories, be they in China. If we talked about Steve Jobs working in the knowledge economy, don't forget that his iPads are actually built in China, aren't they? So they coexist. Life changes then as well. Families become smaller because mom is often going to work as well, so therefore having 1 or 2 children is much more sensible than having 10 or 20. And how you meet your partner might change. So instead of having a family introduction, you can meet each other in the office, which becomes quite common. So let's fast forward. Now the thing about the industrial economy was we actually know when it began. It began about 1850, after about tea time on a Tuesday afternoon. We can pinpoint it. But industrial age is hugely transformational. It changes the shape and landscape of Europe. There are big expansions into what we refer to as the New World, what I like to call Rio de Janeiro. And we have big expansions into these countries. But industrial age may in fact be in decline. So the argument about a knowledge economy is this. The argument is that we have entered a new age in which technology has started to change the way in which we live and work and grow. Now that new technology is computers, telephones, and the internet. And the argument here in a knowledge economy is that how you become successful in a knowledge economy is by having know-how, creativity, and innovation. So why does Steve Jobs become important? Because he is creative, and he is innovation, and he is leadership. So knowledge economy says education that generates creativity, got you, thank you, is really important. Does that make sense? Now that's a great opportunity. It means if you've been born without access to land, if you're born without access to capital, that's okay. Because in a knowledge economy, it's being clever, being creative, being new and innovative is the advantage. This is the theory. I'm running way over time. Okay, so some practical advice on how to become skilled in a knowledge economy. Remember, knowledge economy, we don't really know. Come back in 100 years and I'll tell you exactly what it involved. But what are the practical things you might do to succeed in the knowledge economy? Become a skilled knowledge worker. So a knowledge worker is someone who treats knowledge like a product. But a knowledge worker is someone who knows how to access information on the internet. Knowledge worker is not someone who remembers everything. Your brain should no longer be used to just remember things. Your brain should be used to think and to create. Your computer can remember for you. Your computer can calculate for you. So we need you to work in different ways. You should embrace technology. And that means if tomorrow the iPhone is dead, it's dead. I don't think it will be, but it means do not hold on to technology or technological romances. You must move with technology. It means learning must become lifelong. Whereas your parents and my parents might have finished school at 16, 17, or 21, in a knowledge economy, knowledge and information is coming every day. You cannot finish an education and stop learning and stop growing. You must engage and become a lifelong learner. And I've written here that you should have strong cognitive approaches to learning. That would take a little bit of time to explain, so if you're interested in hearing more about that, please come and see me later on. Knowledge, one of the things we need to accept as well in a global economy is that knowledge is relative. And that means that there may be people who know things that you don't know because of their cultural background. That doesn't mean that person is ignorant or without knowledge, but that knowledge is relative and it may be culturally specific. And arguably, and this is quite difficult sometimes for people, in a knowledge economy, you should always be open to new behaviors and new beliefs. So if you're someone who knows something and isn't open to listening to other arguments or changing behavior, this is quite difficult for you. These are the features of a knowledge economy.